Hello everyone, today I'll be introducing some of you guys to something that you may have not heard about before, which is also one of the most important aspects of change, the process of culture shock. But before I begin, let's talk a little about change itself first. One of the most difficult things in life is change, but what's harder is to accept and embrace it. No matter how big or how small in life, change is unavoidable. Some may think of it as an inconvenience, a setback, but others, they might think of it like a step forward in the game of life. Not all change is bad. Nevertheless, one thing that we know for sure, a change is you growing, progressing, maturing. It helps you learn. As plenty of wise men and women say, don't be afraid of change. Anything you lose will be replaced by something better. It's only a new beginning. Look at you. Are you at all the same self you were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even just a year ago? Having gone through heaps of endless changes and having tried to be understood and understood plenty of times, I know change has never stopped before and will never stop. Nobody from one period of life to another should nor could stay the same. And my story is one direct example of this fact. For certain, my transition from China to Singapore was the biggest change of my life. It was a new country, completely unfamiliar, and those completely new experiences have been carved into my mind. I had to learn a new language, a new culture, a new lifestyle, and mostly to get used to the new environment. My whole stay there, I went through a process called culture shock. Have you all ever heard of culture shock? Well, what is it? It's the process of one going through new changes after moving to a new country or surroundings, while also experiencing new cultures. There are 5 stages of culture shock as known. An anthropologist named Ober came up with this term. The first is called the honeymoon stage. It's when you've just entered the new location and is currently fascinated by all the exciting and different aspects of your new life, from the sights and smells to the pace of life and cultural habits. When I first got to Singapore, for instance, I still remember how shocked I was when I first stepped out of the airport. I'd suck in a deep breath as if that would help me take in the surroundings. Oh boy, the air was sweet. Later, of course, I'd find out that the famous building that I'd just stepped out of was the Singapore Changi Airport. It's awfully well known and almost always said as the award-winning airport of all times. Furthermore, the scent that I just inhaled was one of the small little perks of the airport. Not only was Gradual Changi Airport clean, organized, and modern, but also, as I know for a fact, beautiful. It's full of amazing and unbelievable architecture that seem as if they belong more in a museum than an airport. The airport made my first impression of Singapore. Clean, organized, and modern. Soon enough, my family arrived at the community that we first lived in. Everywhere I looked upon, there were skyscrapers, and each of them with an amazingly detailed and unique design. We eaten out that first week. Nearby, there was this community gathering, and it really showed me how it was in Singapore. The people. People from all over the world, Singaporean, Malaysian, Chinese, Indians, Eurasians, all talked and interacted with each other. Singapore is really diverse. I started to get the idea, and slowly, in my everyday life, I began to do the same. I started being bolder about the idea of talking to other people who weren't in my race. However, as I started going to school there, the second stage of culture happened to me. The rejection stage. Just as its name tells you, it's when you're no longer that curious about your surroundings, and now it irritates you more than astonishing you. I started to feel like the differences weren't really suitable to my old lifestyle and not at all helpful. I disliked their cultures and sometimes even hated them. As I entered school, it started getting worse. As I was just 5 then, I wasn't really that capable of adapting so quickly to an environment. The school that I was going to was completely English, with just a couple of cases here and there who spoke Chinese. And, well, I didn't speak English back then, except for like a couple of sentences, which became my biggest problem of my school life. I couldn't understand. It was really difficult for me to do anything there. As I'd entered the classroom for the first time, I'd sobbed and cried, begged and dragged, anything that could have gotten me out of there. But in the end, my mother still got me into that school. My first day of school for me was horrible. I did nothing. Looking around me, all I could spot was the visible differences. how different I looked from everyone else. As for my age, I couldn't just yet put together that the smiling faces around me were also just as young with the same thoughts, and that although maybe I couldn't understand them now, it was absolutely possible for me to be able to fit in. My teacher helped me realize that. Although I was a misfit and clearly different from everyone else, everyone was much nicer about it than expected. I tried to make friends, but sometimes as a new kid, it was much harder. Everything slowly turned out way better than I expected, however, and it started apparently on the first few days while I've been crying and kind of feeling sorry for myself. A few of my other classmates had been busy trying to welcome me into the school with gifts and presents. That had really helped. Though it didn't take me out of my nutshell, it still helped and gave me the hope that maybe it wouldn't be that hard to fit in. I learned from that it's always better to try things out and feel them first before you give them a stubborn judgment. So how did I travel to the next phase of the process? The gradual adjustment stage. I was stuck in my own world, and for the next few weeks, I was content. But then slowly, I began to feel lonely and the urging for a friend. I owe my everything to this boy who not only brought me out to this world, but also helped me travel to this phase of the process. The gradual adjustment stage is when you've grasped some of the common language and now you understand the world around you more. At school, even though I still couldn't manage to fit in, I now had a friend. At that period of my life, after my mom frantically trying to teach me the language and me going to a completely English environment every day, I could now understand English a little better. And with that and my friend, I could now act casually. I know deeply in my heart that if he hadn't stepped out to help me, I would have been stuck in this stage for much, much longer. He knew that it was hard to be new and tried to help me adapt. Whenever I couldn't understand something, my friend would patiently explain it to me. He welcomed me into his friends, and slowly in my everyday life, I was able to walk in the classroom and greet everyone familiarly. I was able to listen to the teacher's directions and follow them properly with a little help. I was stuck in the stage for a lot longer, however, as I encountered another major change just as I switched from first to second grade. I just started thinking of my life at the school as normal. As I gradually switched from first to second grade, transferring to another school, I had to try to adjust and fit in again. By doing so, I needed to change, think of the new environment as familiar. Luckily for me, friendships saved me again. Many don't know how significant and important friends are, how they'll just be there when you need them, and I'll always thank the people who decide to become friends with me, especially when I was barely anything. By the time I was in third grade, I'd fully grown into the character I was at home and at school. I had fully developed my life in Singapore and had fully adjusted to this now perfectly normal and familiar environment. I'd stepped into the acceptance stage. It's finally the stage where you felt comfortable in your surroundings, and now you have fully grasped the language, and I spoke like a native English speaker. I was able to walk through my community and wave at everyone I saw every day comfortably and recognize things as they were. I no longer thought things fascinating or unusual. My life at school changed too. I had fun, made friends, and unlike before, I actually enjoyed my time there. I slowly made my reputation, becoming rather popular, and found success in my academics. It felt great. It felt more than great. It felt like home. It was a feeling that I hadn't had for a long, long time. After all those challenges, I had finally overcome them, and now I couldn't imagine life that was different from now. I couldn't imagine leaving Singapore and moving on, and I didn't want to either. There's nothing wrong with the way I'd live now, was there? Which was, in a way, what happened. I told myself it would be easier, seeing as I lived there before. It wouldn't be that hard. And so when my whole family agreed to move back to China, hoping for the best, I agreed. As I said earlier, change is the inevitable. This last stage of the process rarely gets ignored, but from time to time, a case happens where you just move somewhere and fully settle down there forever. For the majority, though, often people would go back to visit their home country or maybe to move back there again. Either way, during their time back, should they go back again, they enter the last stage of the process, the reentry shock stage. The reentry shock stage, as I just stated, is the shock from coming back to your original surroundings, the ones that you used to think was normal until you went somewhere else. For me, I'd gone back to China, where everything started. I couldn't help myself to ignore the differences this time. And not only did I marvel and look at them, I compared them too. Although it might seem silly, it was true. The way people talked, act, what they wore, it was all different. I was curious about everything and even the reason behind it. And so, of course, I specialized everything and observed when I could, knowing from experience that it would help me know how to act. Sound familiar? Doesn't sound like I just stepped back into the honeymoon stage. Well then, how is it possible? Culture shock is a process of 5 stages when you go to another environment, but it's also a cycle. After all, who's to say you won't move again? So stepping back into the cycle, you'll have to adjust over and over again. Each time, you gain experience until finally you know how to adjust quickly and it becomes easier for you. There are many important and vital things that you should do for you to be able to adjust. The most important one is, well, just give it time. In a couple of weeks or so, you'd be able to grasp the lifestyle and pace, and then just let yourself gradually do so too. Remember to not just stay in your old ways, and try your best to interact with your community. And make friends. Friends really help. They go with you through the process, telling you what you don't know, and plus, a companion is something good to have anytime. Change is a very important part of everyone's lives. It's going to happen sometime or another, so don't be so sensitive to change. Be prepared. Change in environment opens up to you the process of culture shock, which is just as significant. Be bold. Don't be afraid to put yourself in new situations, to learn and grow, and to just change. Thank you.